There are moments in life that do not announce themselves. They do not arrive with warnings or dramatic music. They arrive as a single sentence from a child, clear, fearless, unaware of the weight it carries. And then the room goes absolutely still. This is the story of one of those moments. It happened in Milan on a Tuesday afternoon in October, inside one of the most prestigious culinary institutions in northern Italy. And it started, as the most important things often do, with a little girl who simply loved her father too much to stay quiet. If you have ever watched someone you love swallow their dignity in silence just to keep a roof over your head, stay with this story. Because what happened in that kitchen, and in the days that followed, is the kind of thing that does not leave you unchanged. Subscribe to this channel if you want stories that remind you what human beings are actually capable of, because we have more coming, and you will not want to miss them. Marcus Webb was 38 years old, and he had spent almost half his life learning to cook with the kind of precision that does not come from talent alone. Talent is the spark. What Marcus had built, through 15 years of early mornings and burned hands and sleepless prep nights, was something closer to architecture. He understood food the way a structural engineer understands load-bearing walls, not just what looks beautiful, but what holds everything up. He had grown up in Baltimore, the son of a postal worker and a woman who made Sunday dinners that neighbors still talked about decades later. His mother, Gloria, believed that a plate of food was a complete sentence, that what you put in front of someone was a statement about how much you valued their presence at your table. Marcus had carried that belief into every kitchen he had ever worked in, and it had shaped him into something rare, a cook who made technically difficult food feel like an embrace. He had worked his way through 2 respected kitchens in Washington, D.C., then 3 years at a celebrated restaurant in New Orleans, then a brief and brilliant stint in London that earned him his first serious review, a paragraph in a food magazine that called his lamb preparation startling in its restraint and devastating in its finish. That sentence had changed the trajectory of his career. It had opened doors he had not known existed. One of those doors led to Milan. The offer came through a culinary exchange program, a prestigious arrangement between a James Beard-affiliated collective in the United States and the Ferrante Group, one of the most powerful names in Italian hospitality. The Ferrante Group owned 11 restaurants across Italy and 3 in Paris. Their flagship, a place called Sala Centodue, held 2 Michelin stars and a waiting list that ran 4 months deep. The exchange program placed 1 American chef per year inside a Ferrante kitchen for a 6-month residency. The idea, at least on paper, was cross-cultural creative dialogue. The unspoken reality was that Ferrante kitchens got access to foreign techniques and talent at a fraction of the cost of hiring internationally at market rate, while the American chef received a prestigious line on their resume and a monthly stipend that barely covered rent in one of the most expensive cities in Europe. Marcus had applied 3 times before being selected. When the acceptance letter arrived, he was sitting in his Baltimore apartment with his daughter Zara, asleep on the couch beside him, her small sneakers still tied, one arm thrown across her face the way she always slept when she was deeply tired. He had read the letter twice. Then he had sat very still for a long time, looking at her. Zara was 6 years old. She had her mother's eyes, wide, impossibly dark, with a way of looking at things that suggested she was cataloguing everything for later use. Her mother, Diane, had left when Zara was 2. Not dramatically, not with cruelty, just gradually, the way some people discover that the life they have built does not fit the person they are becoming. She sent cards on birthdays. She called on holidays. She was not a villain in the story. She was simply absent, and absence over time becomes its own kind of presence. Marcus had raised Zara alone for 4 years. He had done it the way he did everything, methodically, attentively, with an almost obsessive commitment to getting the details right. He packed her lunches with sections and colors. He read to her every night, even when he came home at midnight smelling of stock and fire. He attended every school event in his kitchen whites when he had no time to change. He had built a life around her in the same way his mother had built Sunday dinners, as a complete statement about how much he valued her presence. Taking the Milan residency meant taking Zara with him. There was no one else. His mother was 71 and lived in a 3rd-floor walk-up. Zara's godmother was raising 3 children of her own. So Marcus enrolled her in an international school in the Navigli district, packed their life into 2 large suitcases and a duffel bag, and landed in Milan on a grey September morning with his daughter on his left hand and everything he had built on his back. The first weeks were difficult in the quiet, grinding way that difficult things often are when there is no single catastrophe to point to. The Ferrante group had assigned Marcus to Cucina Laboratorio, an internal development kitchen attached to Sala Centodure, where the group's chefs tested new menu items and refined techniques before presentation to Alessandro Ferrante himself. Alessandro Ferrante was 62, compact, silver-haired, and possessed of the particular confidence of someone who had never in his adult life been told no by anyone who mattered to him. He was not present in the development kitchen. He received reports. He made decisions. He was, in the vocabulary of the kitchen, the final table. The chef overseeing Cucina Laboratorio was a man named Riccardo Motta. Riccardo was 44, classically trained, and possessed of a very specific kind of intelligence, the kind that is acute enough to recognize extraordinary ability in others and insecure enough to find it threatening. He had run the development kitchen for 9 years. In that time, he had supervised 4 previous exchange residents, all of whom had left without leaving any particular mark. Marcus was the 5th. From the first week, Riccardo understood that Marcus was different, and he reacted to that understanding the way small men sometimes react to large presences, by making the space smaller. It started subtly. Marcus would propose a technique and be told politely that it was not applicable to Italian cuisine. He would be assigned prep work that was significantly below his skill level, tasks typically given to junior cooks. When he contributed ideas in morning briefings, they were received with a particular kind of silence that is not the silence of consideration, but the silence of dismissal. His Italian was functional but not fluent, and Riccardo occasionally slipped into rapid dialect during technical discussions, then expressed quiet surprise when Marcus asked for clarification. Nothing that could be pointed to, nothing that left a visible mark, just the steady, low-frequency pressure of a professional environment that had decided at some level below consciousness that he did not belong. Marcus absorbed it. He had absorbed things like this before, in Baltimore kitchens, in Washington kitchens, in London, where the absorption had required a different kind of effort because it wore a more cosmopolitan disguise. He absorbed it because he was 38 years old, and he understood that his presence in spaces like this one was itself a form of argument, and that arguments are won over time through the accumulation of undeniable evidence. He absorbed it because Zara needed stability. He absorbed it because the residency was 6 months, not 6 years. He absorbed it because on weekends he took his daughter to the Brera district, and they looked at paintings and ate cornetti, and she asked him questions about color that made him laugh and forget for a few hours the weight of the week. But things were being set in motion that Marcus did not know about. What he did not know in those first weeks was that Alessandro Ferrante was preparing to present a new tasting menu at Sala Centodue, a menu that would serve as the cornerstone of the restaurant's application for a 3rd Michelin star. The menu was called Radici, meaning roots, and it was conceptually ambitious, a 12-course exploration of Italian culinary heritage reimagined through contemporary technique. Alessandro had been developing the concept for 2 years. The problem was that the concept, while intellectually compelling, had not yet found its culinary voice. The dishes were correct. They were not alive. Riccardo had been tasked with solving this, and Riccardo, who had been watching Marcus work in the development kitchen for 6 weeks, had developed a plan that he had not shared with anyone, including Marcus. The plan was elegant in its cynicism. Allow Marcus to develop ideas, absorb those ideas into the Radici menu without attribution, and present them to Alessandro as the product of the development kitchen's collective effort. It was the kind of theft that happens in professional kitchens more often than the industry likes to admit, the laundering of creativity through institutional credit. It had worked before, with other people, in less obvious ways. Riccardo saw no reason it would not work again. He had underestimated one variable. Zara came to the kitchen on a Tuesday. Marcus's international school had a parent observation afternoon once a month, but that particular Tuesday, the school had a half day for a teacher training event, and Marcus's usual after-school arrangement, a neighbor's teenage daughter who walked Zara home, had fallen through with a same-morning cancellation. He had no option. He called ahead, explained the situation to the Ferrante Group's administrative office, and was told it was acceptable for the child to be present briefly, provided she remained in the designated visitor area near the kitchen entrance. He arrived with Zara at 2:45 in the afternoon, her school backpack still on her shoulders, a juice box in her hand, her expression that particular combination of curiosity and composure that she had developed early and deployed constantly. Marcus settled her at a small table near the kitchen entrance with her reading workbook and her colored pencils, and told her in a low, firm voice that she was to stay seated, speak quietly if she spoke at all, and not touch anything. Zara nodded with the gravity of someone who understood that this was his world and she was a guest in it. For 40 minutes things were fine. Marcus was working on a preparation he had been developing quietly on his own time. A reimagining of ribollita, the Tuscan bread soup, constructed around a technique borrowed from Japanese dashi methodology. The result was a broth of extraordinary clarity and depth, a kind of transparent architecture that made the familiar flavors of the Florentine classic feel like they were being heard for the first time without background noise. He had made it 3 times. Each iteration had moved closer to something he could not yet fully name, but recognized the way you recognize a face in a crowd before you can place the name. Alessandro Ferrante arrived at 3:27. This was unusual. Alessandro rarely came to the development kitchen unannounced. His presence created an immediate shift in the room's atmosphere, the kind of atmospheric change that happens when the person whose opinion defines reality enters a space. Ricardo moved quickly to intercept him, and the 2 men began a conversation near the pass that Marcus could hear only partially. Then Alessandro turned and walked toward the main prep station where Marcus was working. Ricardo followed. Alessandro looked at the bowl in front of Marcus. He looked at Marcus. Then he said something in Italian to Ricardo that Marcus caught only fragments of, something about the program, something about expectations. Ricardo answered. Then Alessandro looked at Marcus again and said in English with a thick, precise accent, "Show me what you are doing." Marcus explained the dish. He explained the technique. He explained the decision-making behind the construction, why the clarity of the broth was not a departure from ribollita's tradition, but a form of honoring it, a way of letting the ingredients speak without the textural noise that usually surrounded them. He spoke with the quiet authority of someone who has thought about something very carefully and is now simply describing what they have found. Alessandro listened without expression. Then Ricardo spoke. He spoke in Italian quickly, and what he said, Marcus would understand later in full, was a version of the following: that the direction was promising but incomplete, that the kitchen had been exploring adjacent territory for several weeks, that the Americans' contribution had been primarily as a technical reference point rather than a creative lead. He framed it carefully. He framed it the way someone frames a theft to look like a collaboration. Alessandro said nothing for a moment. Then he looked at Marcus and said, "Can you develop this further for the radishi menu?" Before Marcus could answer, Ricardo said, "We have been discussing the menu direction as a team. I can walk you through the full concept." Alessandro nodded and turned back to Ricardo. The conversation shifted to Italian. Marcus stood at his station, still holding his ladle, and something in him went very quiet. The particular quiet that comes not from peace, but from the recognition of what is happening and the decision about how to respond to it. He had not noticed that Zara had put down her colored pencils. She had been watching. She had been watching her father stand at that station for the last several minutes, and she had seen something that she did not have the vocabulary to name precisely, but understood completely. She had seen him become invisible inside a conversation about something he had made. She had seen his face do the thing it sometimes did on hard nights, the thing she could not describe but always felt. The way you feel weather changing before the sky shows it. She got up from her table. She walked across the kitchen floor in her school shoes, her backpack bumping lightly against her back, her juice box still in her hand. She walked with the absolute purposefulness of someone who has decided. She stopped 2 feet from Alessandro Ferrante, the silver-haired man in the dark jacket whose presence had changed the air, and she looked up at him. Alessandro looked down at her with the expression of a man encountering something entirely outside his prepared categories, and Zara said, "Did you just call my dad fat and ugly?" The room stopped. Marcus's hand froze around the ladle handle. 2 junior cooks near the cold station exchanged a look of pure alarm. Ricardo's face went through several expressions in rapid succession before settling on something between astonishment and horror. Alessandro Ferrante, who had not in fact said anything remotely resembling those words, stared at this 6-year-old girl with an expression that could not be easily classified. He began. "Because," Zara continued, in the perfectly steady voice of someone delivering information they consider factual and important, "my dad is not fat, and he is not ugly, and that food he just made smells like Sunday, and Sunday is the best day. So if you said that, you need to say sorry." She was not shouting. She had not technically been shouting when she said it the first time either, despite what witnesses later recalled. She spoke with the clarity of a child who has not yet learned that there are things you are not supposed to say out loud, or rather, who has learned that lesson but has determined that some things are more important than the lesson. Alessandro Ferrante looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at Marcus. Marcus was looking at his daughter with an expression of controlled devastation, the face of a man trying to determine how to manage this, how to apologize, how to return the room to something navigable. His mouth opened. Alessandro raised one hand very slightly, and Marcus went still. Alessandro crouched down, which was for a 62-year-old man in an expensive jacket not a small gesture, until he was approximately at Zara's eye level. He looked at her seriously, as one looks at someone who has said something that deserves a serious response. "I did not say that," he said in English carefully, "but I understand why you came to check." Zara studied him. "My dad made that food," she said, pointing at the bowl. "Not the other man." Another silence. Alessandro stood. He turned to look at Ricardo, and something in his face had changed, and not dramatically, not with accusation, but with the particular quality of attention that comes when a person with power realizes they have been receiving incomplete information. The shift was subtle, it was enormous. "Leave us," Alessandro said to Ricardo, and then, gesturing toward the prep station, "Stay," to Marcus. This is the moment that changed everything. Not the confrontation, not the shout, not the freeze. The moment was the crouching down. The moment was a 62-year-old man choosing to take a 6-year-old seriously because she had walked across a professional kitchen in her school shoes to defend someone she loved, and that act in its absolute fearlessness had told him something about the man she was defending. What followed over the next 3 days was not a dramatic revelation or a public reckoning. It was quieter than that, and more thorough. Alessandro asked Marcus to walk him through everything he had developed during the residency. Not in a meeting room. In the kitchen, over 3 sessions, Marcus cooked. He made the ribollita broth. He made a second preparation, an interpretation of botarga that used cold smoking technique to create a flavor layering that was simultaneously ancient and completely new. He made a dessert construction built around amaretto and fermented fig that had emerged from a conversation with Zara about what autumn tasted like. Because she had asked him one evening what seasons tasted like, and he had answered her seriously, as he answered all her serious questions, and the answer had become a dish. Alessandro tasted everything without speaking. He asked questions, technical questions, conceptual questions, questions about decision-making and intention. He listened to the answers with the kind of attention that is its own form of respect. On the 3rd day, he asked Marcus to sit with him at the small table near the kitchen entrance, the same table where Zara had been sitting with her colored pencils. He set 2 cups of espresso between them, and he was quiet for a moment, looking at the kitchen. Then he said, "How much of the Radici concept originated with you?" Marcus was careful. He was honest. He said, "I cannot tell you what was discussed before I arrived. I can tell you what I developed, when I developed it, and how." He could demonstrate the development because he kept notes, a habit from his years in Baltimore, when his mother had told him that a cook who does not write things down is a cook who lets ideas die. He had notebooks. He had dated entries. He had a record of every idea, every failed attempt, every revision. Alessandro looked at the notebooks for a long time. What he said next was not an apology exactly. It was not in Alessandro Ferrante's nature to apologize with the kind of verbal elaboration that Americans sometimes associate with the word. What he said was, "The Radici menu will carry a collaborative credit. Your name will be listed as a primary contributor, and I'm extending your residency by 4 months at a rate reflecting the level of the contribution." He said it the way he said most things, with finality without performance. Then he said, "Your daughter." Marcus waited. "She said the food smells like Sunday." Alessandro picked up his espresso cup. "That is the correct sentence. That is exactly what I wanted the menu to feel like, and that is the sentence I was looking for." He paused. "She has a good palate, for a person who is 6. Marcus looked down at his espresso. Something in his chest moved in a way he did not entirely trust himself to manage, so he looked down and breathed through it and then looked back up. "She does," he said. "She gets it from her grandmother." Riccardo Motta was reassigned within the Ferrante group. Not fired, but moved laterally to an administrative role that removed him from the development kitchen. Alessandro handled it with the same efficiency he applied to all structural problems. There was no announcement. There was no confrontation Marcus was invited to witness. The correction was made, and the kitchen moved forward, and that was the Ferrante way. The Radici menu premiered at Sala Centodue in early December. The ribollita broth was on the menu described as a transparency of tradition. Marcus's phrase from his notebook carried forward intact. The amaretto and fermented fig dessert was listed simply by its components, but the internal kitchen documentation credited its conceptual origin to a conversation about what autumn tastes like. The menu received coverage in 4 major Italian food publications and 2 international ones. One reviewer used the phrase startling clarity. Another used the word inevitable, meaning the reviewer wrote that each dish felt as though it could not have been constructed any other way, that each dish felt like it had always existed, and the chef had simply found it. Marcus kept both reviews. He put them in his notebook, next to the dated entry for the ribollita broth, next to the sketch of the amaretto construction, next to a question Zara had written in blue crayon on a loose page she had folded and tucked inside. "What does Sunday taste like, Daddy?" He had answered in pen in the margin, "Like something warm that was made for you specifically." Zara, for her part, did not fully understand what she had done. She knew that she had asked a man a question that needed asking. She knew that her father had seemed lighter in the weeks after. She knew that one evening he had come home at a reasonable hour and made dinner, and they had eaten together at their small kitchen table in their Navigli apartment, and he had told her that things were going well, that he was proud of what he was making, that he wanted her to try something, and he had given her a small spoon of the fig preparation, and she had tasted it and then looked at him with those wide cataloguing eyes and said, "That tastes like when you come home." He had written that down too. The residency ended in April. Marcus returned to Baltimore with Zara and with a portfolio of work and professional documentation that would, over the following 2 years, help him open his own restaurant, a small, precise, deeply personal place in a renovated row house in the Remington neighborhood. He named it after nothing dramatic. He named it Gloria, after his mother, who had taught him that a plate of food is a complete sentence. It received a favorable review in its first year from a critic who called it one of the most emotionally intelligent kitchens currently operating in the city. The phrase Marcus circled was not the compliment. The phrase he circled was, "You feel, eating here, that someone thought carefully about you before you arrived." He had thought carefully about his daughter before she arrived too, about what kind of world she would move through, about what she would need to understand, and what she would need to feel, and what she would do when she saw someone she loved being made invisible in a room full of people who had decided, without looking closely, that he did not belong there. She had walked across that kitchen floor in her school shoes. She had asked a question in a voice that did not shake. She had pointed at a bowl of food and said, My dad made that. And the room had gone still, and a man had crouched down to look at her seriously, and something that had been tilting in the wrong direction had corrected itself. Not because of a speech or a confrontation or a dramatic revelation, but because a 6-year-old girl had decided that some things are more important than staying in your seat. There is a particular kind of dignity that cannot be granted by institutions or titles or reviews. It is the kind that comes from someone who loves you, seeing clearly what is happening to you, and refusing, at considerable risk to the peace of the room, to pretend they do not see it. It is the dignity of being defended by someone who has nothing to gain from the defense except the knowledge that they did not stay quiet. Marcus Webb understood this. He had understood it since Baltimore, since Sunday dinners, since his mother who built complete sentences on plates. He had understood it in every kitchen that had tried to make him smaller. He had carried it across the Atlantic and into a development kitchen in Milan, and through 6 months of absorption and silence and careful, methodical work. But it was his daughter, 6 years old, school shoes, juice box, backpack, who said it out loud. And the room froze, and the right things slowly and permanently began to move. If this story stayed with you, leave a comment telling us what part hit you hardest, and if you know someone who has ever been made to feel invisible in a room where they were the most capable person present, share this with them. They deserve to hear it. We will see you in the next one.